The NBA has seen many great athletes, some lasting a long time in the league, and others not so long. This longevity is something that is talked about all the time, and is something I value in a player's career. But as of 2021, nobody has been able to statistically show these great athletes' primes and the impact they've had on the league. That's why I'm going to list the best NBA player from each year, acknowledge the runner-ups, and tally up the results. Leaving off in 1995, we're going to start with 1996, and then this year, I have Michael Jordan as the best in the world after coming back from his huge absence. MJ had a really bad year in 1995, but in 1996, he really took over that crown. He was the NBA champion once again and the NBA MVP. And sure, he was a little bit rusty still, but he averaged 30, 7, and 4 pretty casually. For the runner-ups, we got Karl Malone and Hakeem Olajuwon. You could definitely argue Hakeem. I don't really know about Karl Malone, maybe, but at the end of the day, MJ was the champion, so there's no denying he was the best in the world. And in 1997, I have Michael Jordan once again, averaging 36 and 4. He was the NBA champion and the points per game leader. And honestly, if MJ wasn't in the league at this time, you could definitely argue that Scottie Pippen was the best in the world. The man was actually very dominant, and without MJ, he would have had an even greater scoring load. But at the end of the day, MJ still, without a doubt, the best player in 1997. There's also Hakeem and Karl Malone, which were both very formidable runner-ups. And in 1998, I have Michael Jordan for his final season as the best in the world. He averaged 29, 6, and 4, and got his 6th NBA championship and was the points per game leader. For the runner-up this season, I have Karl Malone, who was very formidable, but because MJ won the championship, there's still no denying he was the best in the world. And in 1999, finally, Karl Malone is the best player in the world. The man was really good. I know he never ended up winning a championship, but in 1999, I would say he was the best. He averaged 24, 9, and 4. Sure, it wasn't his best year, but MJ was on his downfall, so Karl Malone gets this spot, and he definitely deserves it. He was the MVP this year and the win shares leader, and that backs up everything I just said. For the runner-ups, I have Tim Duncan and Shaq. Shaq was a little bit too young, but as you'll see, he blossomed in the next season. In 2000, you guessed it, Shaq was the best player in the world, and I don't think anyone can deny this. This guy was so dominant, nobody could guard him, and that's when Hack-a-Shaq became a thing. Even when Hack-a-Shaq was a thing, it wasn't something that could be sustained throughout an entire game, obviously because of bonus, but Shaq was so dominant, averaging 30, 14, and 4. He was the NBA champion and the NBA MVP and the points per game leader and the win shares leader. Like, you literally can't be any better than that. For the runner-ups, nobody even comes close, so Shaq was definitely the best player in the world. In the year 2001, Shaq wasn't quite the same, and Allen Iverson is the person who I think was the best in the world. This one is definitely up for debates, as there were definitely a couple other formidable players that could have been the best in the world, and you can argue them. But I have Allen Iverson. He was the points per game leader, averaging 31.3 points, averaged 4 rebounds and 5 assists. He was the MVP this year as well, which is one of the biggest awards you can attain. Sure, he wasn't the NBA champion, but I think that if Allen Iverson had a better squad, he would have been a perennial champion. For the runner-ups this season, you could definitely argue for Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki. It's pretty close, but I still have AI as the best in the world for this single season. And in 2002, the era of the Spurs takes over, as Tim Duncan is the best player in the world. He averaged 26, 13, and 4, which is very formidable. And as everyone knows, Tim Duncan is one of the smartest players in the league. He was always doing stuff, not to stat pad, but to win. And he was very efficient. So even though these stats are great, sure, they're a little bit worse than some of the previous champions, but you have to realize that Tim Duncan did all of this to win championships, not just to be a stat padder. Tim Duncan was the MVP this year and was the win shares leader. So Tim Duncan, without a doubt, was the best player. For the runner-ups this year, there are a few. Allen Iverson, he was the best player in the world the season prior, so he definitely has a case. Then there was Shaquille O'Neal, who was very dominant almost every year in the early 2000s, and Dirk Nowitzki. But at the end of the day, I think Tim Duncan was without a doubt the best player. In 2003, I got Tim Duncan once again. Sure, his stats weren't quite as good as the season prior, but he was the NBA champion, and the NBA MVP once again, and notably he was the win shares leader. For the runner-ups, I have Kobe Bryant, who actually has a big case for being the best in the world, but as you'll see, he blossoms a little bit later. Dirk Nowitzki and Tracy McGrady. It's unfortunate that Tracy McGrady had such a short career. You could definitely argue that he was the best in the world, but he ended up not making much noise in the playoffs. And in 2004, I got Kevin Garnett as the best player in the world. Kevin Garnett this season was absolutely unstoppable. He was the MVP, the win shares leader, and the rebounds per game leader. And honestly, I think he should have been Defensive Player of the Year. The man averaged 24, 14, and 5. And man, he was just straight dominant for this single season. Sure, he was great in the other seasons after this, but man, Kevin Garnett, I think without a doubt, was the best player in 2004. Obviously, for the runner-ups, Tim Duncan. He was arguably the best player every single year, but I have Kevin Garnett above him, and Tracy McGrady, in his short stint there, has a case for the best player in the world. And in 2005, I have Tim Duncan once again. Sure, his stats are starting to dwindle a little bit, but he was the NBA champion, and as I said earlier, this man isn't there to stat pad, he's there to win championships. And man, he definitely did that in 2005. For the runner-ups, you could definitely argue that Kobe was the best in the world. Honestly, it's very, very close. You could also argue Kevin Garnett was the best. Sure, he wasn't quite as good as in 2004, but he was still very formidable and a great defender. And Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk was always arguably the best scorer in the league until Kobe came, so yeah, those three guys are definitely very formidable runner-ups. In 2006, I have Kobe Bryant as the best in the world. And for the runner-ups, I have Steve Nash, the MVP, Dirk Nowitzki, and LeBron James. Steve Nash was the MVP this year, but in all honesty, Kobe deserved it more. The man averaged 35, 5, and 5, and was by far the points per game leader. Sure, you could argue that in prior years, Kobe was the best in the world, but in these years, I had Tim Duncan over Kobe, because I think Tim Duncan was way more mature, had a way higher IQ, and was able to do what his team needed to win championships, despite not having the best team. Sure, Kobe had Shaq and was able to win some championships, but if you really look at Tim Duncan's Spurs, sure, they had guys like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, which were great players, but at the end of the day, they weren't quite as good as Shaq. So for those reasons, I had Tim Duncan above Kobe in prior years. But later in his years, Kobe definitely blossomed into the player that we all love. Kobe was absolutely dominant in these mid-2000s. And in 2007, I have Kobe once again, just like his season prior, was absolutely dominant, was the points per game leader, averaging 32, 6, and 5. And for the runner-ups this season, I have Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki, and young LeBron James. Kobe was arguably the best player in prior years, like I said previously, but Kobe was definitely the best in 2007. And in 2008, I have the takeover of LeBron James. Man, LeBron started to come into his own in 2008. He was the points per game leader, averaging 38 and 7. And man, LeBron started to do LeBron things in 2008, and doing LeBron things gives you the top spot. He was completely dominant. Sure, his team didn't have the best record, but he was playing on a Cleveland Cavs team, which was basically LeBron James. It was insane what LeBron did to carry this team to even get a couple wins, but without LeBron, I don't think that team would have won any games. And for the runner-ups in 2008, I got Kobe. You could definitely argue that he was the best because of his experience, but I still have LeBron over him, and Chris Paul, obviously, was a monster in 2008. But in 2009, I have LeBron once again, averaging LeBron numbers, 28, 8, and 7. That's pretty mediocre for LeBron, but he won the MVP this year and was the win shares leader, so these accolades definitely backed up what he did. And for the runner-ups this year, I have Dwayne Wade, who, just like Chris Paul the season prior, was dominant, and Kobe Bryant once again, who you could definitely argue was the best, but I still have LeBron in 2009 as the best in the world. And in 2010, we got LeBron once again, averaging even better numbers than the prior seasons. He was the MVP and the win shares leader. He averaged 37 and 9, which is absolutely absurd. And for the runner-up this season, I got Kevin Durant, who was very young but was starting to come into his own. As we all know, KD is a prolific scorer. I don't think you could quite put him over LeBron, but I put him in the runner-up spot just because he was a notable player. But in 2011, I have Dirk Nowitzki as the best in the world. Sure, Dirk wasn't quite as good in 2011 as he was in prior seasons, but his championship run with the Mavs is something that cannot be forgotten. Sure, his regular season stats weren't great, 23, 7, and 3, but honestly, Dirk was completely dominant in the playoffs. I don't think anyone can really put LeBron over him in 2011. They literally faced off in the finals, and Dirk beat down the Heat. So, with that being said, Dirk definitely deserves the top spot. And for the runner-up is obviously LeBron. In my opinion, I think LeBron was technically the better player, but when it came down to the playoffs, Dirk was completely dominant, and the Heat really had no answer for him. So for those reasons, Dirk was the best in the world in 2011. In 2012, I have LeBron retaking over his reign as the best in the world. He started that championship run with the Heat. He was the NBA champion, NBA MVP, averaged 27, 8, and 6. So without a doubt, LeBron was the best in the world. For the runner-up, though, I have Kevin Durant, once again, who had a great season himself, but LeBron was the champion this year, so I don't think you can really put anyone else at the top spot. And in 2013, we got LeBron once again. 27, 8, and 7 is absolutely great, but for LeBron, it's just mediocre. He was the NBA champion and the NBA MVP, like prior years, and also notably, he was the win shares leader in these championship runs. And for the runner-up, I have Carmelo Anthony, who was an absolute bucket in 2013, but without a doubt, LeBron was the best in the world. And in 2014, though, I have Kevin Durant as the best in the world. This was Kevin Durant's first year where he broke out and became the man that we all know him to be. He was the NBA MVP and was by far the points per game leader, averaging 32, 7, and 6. Man, KD had a great season this year, and because the Heat didn't win the championship, I have to give KD this spot over LeBron. He just performed a little bit better. You could argue that LeBron was still the better player because of his experience, but LeBron didn't win the championship with the Heat, so I have to give it to KD. And in 2015, I got LeBron once again. This year is a little bit controversial. Sure, LeBron doesn't have any of the accolades to back him up, but the man averaged 25, 6, and 7 in the regular season, which was diminished by his playoff efforts. Sure, the Warriors won this year, and you could say Curry was the best. I would say that's the second best player in the league at that time. But in all honesty, I have LeBron over him, just because of his sheer experience. And that Golden State team was admittedly way better than the Cavs. The Cavs had all those injuries, so if Golden State didn't win, there would have been a problem. And for the other runner-up, I have Kevin Durant. Throughout all these years, KD was very formidable, and you could argue he was the best in the world, but I still have LeBron James. Sure, his regular season stats weren't quite amazing and what you'd expect from the best player, but in the playoffs, even though he lost, he showed who he is. And in 2016, I have LeBron once again, averaging very similar numbers to 2015, but this year, he was the NBA champion. And it was all because of him. The man went absolutely off in the NBA Finals and throughout the entire playoffs. He had that infamous 3-1 comeback over the Golden State Warriors, so I don't think anyone can put anyone over LeBron in 2016. It was one of the most dominant years in NBA history. For the runner-ups, if you had to give a runner-up, I got Steph Curry and KD, but in all honesty, you could just leave the runner-ups as empty because LeBron was absolutely dominant. And in 2017, I have LeBron again. Sure, didn't win the championship this year, but with KD on the Warriors, it was really tough for anyone to beat them. Sure, the Rockets took him to 7, but that team was literally built to beat the Warriors, and they still came up short. LeBron averaged 26, 9, and 9, which is absolutely absurd in the regular season. And in the playoffs, he did great going to the finals, but there was no way that Cavs team was going to beat the loaded Golden State team. And another notable runner-up for 2017 is Russell Westbrook. The man won the NBA MVP and had that insane revenge tour. Sure, didn't really amount to much, but Russ was absolutely dominant in 2017, and I had to put him as a runner-up. The man averaged a triple-double. And in 2018, I got LeBron James once again, averaging 28, 9, and 9. Oh my god, that's just insane. I know that Golden State won the championship, and you could say that KD was better, but in 2017 and 2018, I think we can all agree that LeBron was the best in the world, despite not winning the championship. He just didn't have the supporting cast to get him over the hump. And in 2019, because LeBron was injured, I have Kawhi Leonard as the best in the world. I think without a doubt. He averaged 27, 7, and 3 in the regular season, but as we all know, had an infamous playoff run where he hit insane shots in the playoffs that really nobody else has ever done. He was the NBA champion this year with the Raptors, and sure, KD was probably a better individual player, but he wasn't able to get it done. He got injured, and at the end of the day, Kawhi was able to outlast everybody. And also this year, I have James Harden as a runner-up. He averaged an absurd stat line. I believe it was like 35, 36 points per game, but I still think without a doubt Kawhi was the best in the world. Also, Kawhi was probably the best defender in the league, even in 2019. So, for all those reasons, I have Kawhi as the best in the world. And in 2020, I have LeBron James as the best in the world. The man averaged 25, 8, and 10, was the NBA champion, and the assist per game leader, so I think without a doubt, LeBron was the best. Sure, you could argue guys like Giannis were a little bit better, but in my opinion, I think LeBron was the best in the world. He completely dominated in the playoffs, and even though he had Anthony Davis on his squad, LeBron showed us all what the king can do. And sure, he was aging, but I still think LeBron was the best, considering he had that insane playoff run with the Lakers. And in 2021, I have Kevin Durant as the best in the world. I think without a doubt, everyone can agree that KD was the best this season. Sure, at the start of the year, personally, I thought LeBron was the best. And as you'll see in my top 50 NBA players list, I actually put LeBron as the best in the world. But this playoffs, Kevin Durant showed everyone, like myself, wrong. The man averaged 27, 7, and 6 in the regular season. And despite injury, he came out firing in the playoffs. As I'm recording this video, KD and the Nets just lost to the Bucks, but KD hit that insane game-tying shot that, honestly, his foot was barely on the line, and the Nets definitely deserved to win that game. KD absolutely carried the Nets on his back, despite having a great supporting cast. They were just all injured. I think without a doubt, KD is the best in the world right now, but there are a decent amount of runner-ups right now. Steph had an absolutely absurd regular season, so that is very notable. LeBron, even though with injuries and stuff, he still performed decent in the playoffs. It wasn't really his fault his team lost, but still, he wasn't performing at the same level as KD. And of course, Kawhi Leonard, who at this point in time is playing great right now, and I think the Clippers have a chance to make a run to the finals. Now let's take a look at players with multiple years at the number 1 spot. As you can see on this list, so many all-time greats are on this list. Starting at the bottom, we got guys like Hakeem, Kobe, and KD with 2, Larry Bird and Tim Duncan with 3, Moses Malone with 4, which he really doesn't get credit for, Kareem and MJ with 9, and LeBron James with 10. Honestly, these guys are absolutely insane. And something that is notable, we only started in the 1970 season, so guys like Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, they aren't really mentioned in this list because at the end of the day, we only started in 1970. But just note that if we started way earlier, like in 1950, these guys would be dominating this list. But in all honesty, I think that starting at 1970 was a good thing, because or else we just have so many guys at the top, like Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Russell. In this next list, we have players with multiple runner-ups. This is a very long list, but it's very notable because it shows players that didn't quite have enough number 1s, but were very formidable in multiple seasons. Guys at the top like Magic Johnson and Kevin Durant had many years where they were arguably the best in the world, but just weren't quite good enough. Sure, in all honesty, like Magic Johnson deserved more number 1s. It just happened to be the timing that made him not get enough. Like Larry Bird in those early years, I think without a doubt was a little bit better, so I had to give it to him. And then by the end, MJ started to come up and surpass Magic Johnson, so at the end of the day, it is what it is. But Magic Johnson still had 7 runner-ups, and Kevin Durant, Dirk Nowitzki, all these guys had so many runner-ups, but just couldn't quite be the best at certain years. And all these guys got recognition at some point, but at the end of the day, weren't quite the best in these seasons. And in this final list, we have the highest player totals. So this is the players' number 1 seasons plus their runner-up seasons. And at the top, we have LeBron James with 10 first place and 5 runner-ups with a total of 15. As we go down the list, we see players like MJ, Kareem, Kevin Durant, Magic, Tim Duncan, Dirk, Kobe, Moses Malone, Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal, Karl Malone, Larry Bird, and Charles Barkley. This is a great list to look at because in this list, you can see the difference between players like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Magic Johnson ended up having way more seasons being as dominant, being the 1 or 2 or 3rd best player than Larry Bird, but Larry Bird had more seasons at number 1. So at the end of the day, it all depends what you value most to determine which player is better, but I think this list is very telling of the players that have the most longevity. And that's the end of part 2. Thank you guys so much for watching these 2 videos. I really appreciate the support. These videos take me a long time to make, approximately 5 hours for each of the videos, so I would really appreciate if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoy basketball related content. I post weekly on this channel, so I'd love to see you guys hop along for the journey. Anyways, this is Smitty, signing off.
Check it.